Galloway's Glen Sheader talks about our ECLO services.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our Wow Wednesday with our eye clinic liaison expert, Glen. And Glen is going to give you a little bit more information on his role and tell you lots more facts and things. So over to you now, please, Glen.
Thank you, Jenny. So, as Jenny said, my name is Glen Sheader. I'm one of our eye clinic liaison officers. Myself, I'm based in Royal Preston Hospital. We also have the service in Royal Lancaster Infirmary and Chorley and District Hospital. Also, I would say at this point is we do network with all the other eye clinic liaison officers as well. So if anybody does have any particular issues, but maybe are attending a different hospital, still contact Galloway's and we can offer support. We can put you in touch with the relevant person. But if I then go more into detail, obviously what my role is. So quite often I'll refer to ECLO. So ECLO is the shortened version of eye clinic liaison officer. So the role of an ECLO is to be a clinic-based person. So as I mentioned, I'm based in Royal Preston Hospital. So I work more often than not with the eye clinic. And the idea is to generally be that really early intervention for people. So if you can imagine, you come into an eye clinic, perhaps it's your first time into the eye clinic, you get a diagnosis. Quite often, I'm sure a lot of you will recognize that you're then in a situation where you need to quickly soak up what you've been told in terms of what your eye condition is. You've perhaps got the impact of that then in terms of, it's not a nice experience. There's the emotional impact to consider. There's then all the impact of, are you in work? Do you need to now go home and figure out how you're going to manage at home? Do you now have to give up your driving license? Are you a parent? Do you care for somebody at home? There's all these different things that we then will assess and start to look at to tailor the assessment, the ECLO assessment to you as an individual. So the idea being potentially from the moment you're told within the eye clinic of what your diagnosis is, you can sometimes within that same day, because often obviously we're based in the eye clinic, so you can get the referral there and then whilst you're in the eye clinic. But often as well, it will be a referral into the service, or you'll get one of our business cards to get in touch. So from that point, we can obviously speak to the individual. And obviously at that point, we can start to assess the individual's needs. So the key things that an ECLO is looking at, as I said a moment ago, is that, do you understand your diagnosis? Do you feel like you've got enough information to understand your eye condition, how to potentially manage your eye condition, maybe any risk factors with your eye condition? Maybe you are somebody that perhaps needs to be much more careful of sunshine and UV rays and that kind of thing. We're also looking at any potential of, are you somebody who is having to maintain some treatment? So for example, eye drops or injections or laser and things like that. So again, we'll want to make sure that you understand those elements of your role and make sure you can confidently take those medications, or you know what to expect if you do have to come for injections or laser and that type of thing. From there, generally, we're then starting to look at, how is this impacting on you? Has this all happened suddenly? Is this something that's happened over a long period of time? Just to try and get a picture of, where are you up to as an individual with your journey? Is this a sudden change for you? Is this something that's been sort of hanging over you for a while and you've now got a diagnosis? So we'll really start to look at the emotional impact and start to see how does this impact on your identity as a person? Because quite often, it's a loss of vision, but quite often it's perhaps a loss of your driving license. It's a loss of independence. It's a loss of perhaps the ability to maybe access certain things like hobbies, leisure, entertainment. So initially in those early stages, it's quite a lot of losses all in a short space of time. So we'll really go into that in some depth and see how you're feeling about the situation. And then from there, we'll look at, how is this impacting on you? What's the biggest things right now that if we can enable you to do those things is going to get you through the next few weeks and months to sort of just start building some confidence, which quite often could be, let's maybe look at your ability to read and see information. So we might look at some low vision assessment, so you can look at getting some magnifiers. It could be looking at how you're managing with your daily living at home. Let's look at how independent you're feeling at home, how safe, how confident with getting around the house, preparing a meal, preparing a cup of tea, washing, dressing, these types of things. So we'll focus on that and see how confident or not an individual is with that side of things. And all of this is then looking to give advice, make some particular referrals to different organisations to get some support. Generally, then we're starting to look at how an individual is managing in terms of any support network around you. Who do you have around you that can offer you some support? And again, if not, we'll be looking to try and put you in contact with people. Obviously, I'm clinic based, but I work for Galloway's. So the ideal is, we'll look to agree a referral within the Galloways to then speak to, more colleagues within the team and start giving you more options of support. We'll also be looking at, is employment an issue? Are you in employment? Similar to that, we'll be looking at, the financial aspect of, are you in receipt of any benefits? Is there any potential of you actually then applying or maybe upgrading some of those benefits? Quite linked to that is then, are you somebody are you registered? Do you have a certificate of vision impairment? If you don't, again, we'll be looking at, are you eligible? And if you are, I can then take that forward and speak to the relevant professionals to look at getting that in place. Registration is quite a big part of what the ECLO does in terms of, making sure that is happening within the eye clinic and making sure people who are eligible do get registered. And then obviously that can be a good way of getting certain support in place. It makes many things much easier in terms of social services support, any particular benefits that we want to apply for. There's lots of different things that we could delve into and look at, any other areas where you might have some support if you need to be registered. We'd then start to look at your ability to access certain things in terms of how you're managing communication-wise. Say, are you able to access your home telephone, your mobile phone, your laptop, your tablet computer? Obviously, those are very key pieces of equipment that most people have access to, and we need to obviously confidently access those things. Obviously, if you can't access something as simple as your landline phone, that's quite an urgent thing to try and look at, and let's try and get some support in place to make that possible. Any pieces of equipment, we'll start to identify whether something may benefit an individual. Often the key things that I focus on in the sort of early stages will be things to just help in terms of maybe lighting could make a difference, or UV filters to sort of give some eye protection could be quite important. More equipment then is where I would recommend that I refer somebody into Galloway's to see one of our sight loss advisors and get some more in-depth advice and support around other pieces of equipment. Generally, those are the first initial things that I would be assessing for as an ECLO. Often then what happens is we agree a point where maybe 3 weeks down the line, maybe sometimes 8 weeks down the line, we'll agree a particular time where I will then get back in touch and check how things have then gone. Any referrals that we've agreed on, we'd then look at, did you then get the benefits in place after we sent you for a benefits check? Or that certificate of vision impairment that we agreed on, look and see if you're eligible. Has that now come through? Have you now got a copy? So there's various things that we would then have as a follow-up and discuss those things and see where things are at. From there, it then could be more of a conversation of, next steps. What things are coming next after that? What we were then looking at is, if you don't necessarily need any more sort of clinical support, you would have my details and get back in touch maybe next time you're coming into clinic. If you have some more questions, we then obviously can either I contact you or you contact me and we can speak again. Quite often what happens is people then get back in touch, maybe, for example, using the ECLO service if vision deteriorates. If your vision starts to deteriorate, it's a good reason to obviously get back in touch and we can discuss what's the best advice. Sometimes the best advice is I can maybe speed an appointment up and get somebody seen back in clinic. If maybe you're already coming in anyway, we can sometimes just expedite an appointment and get you back in. Or if you've not got an appointment, then we can look to get you, we can agree on you getting seen at an optician's, and then an optician can obviously give you the relevant support. If necessary, they can then get you seen in the eye clinic and refer you in. Again, in terms of the eligibility for CVIs, someone may get back in touch if they feel that the vision's deteriorated and they now feel that perhaps they are now eligible for registration. We can start to look at that. There's other things that tend to come up just very much tailored to individuals. Obviously, sometimes as an ECLO, if it's somebody who is a child or the parents of a child, there's obviously different types of conversation that we then have to look at, support within education and lots of other things if it's a child. There's then other things that crop up just depending on where somebody's at within the journey. So if I do know that someone's at those very early stages and it is all really overwhelming and challenging, we'd be looking at the emotional impact and we'd be really looking at whether or not some form of like a counselling service would be of benefit to an individual. There are other things in terms of depending on which particular eye condition to look at, just how to potentially get a bit more use out of that remaining vision that an individual has. So that would be quite a focus of an assessment. So maybe there's such thing as eccentric viewing training. So if somebody does have central vision loss, we'd be looking at having a conversation around that and looking at how we can get you some support or training with that side of things. Something that comes up in conversation that quite often comes as something to explain to somebody, that always comes as, it doesn't necessarily always feel like it's a question about an individual's eye condition, but it's a very relevant question, is around whether or not an individual's having hallucinations. So if anybody's never heard of it here, there's such thing as Charles Bonnet syndrome, which isn't necessarily linked to any particular eye condition. It generally can affect any individual with sight loss. And basically what happens is somebody will start to see things that aren't there, because the brain's great at adapting to vision loss, but the brain actually starts to fill gaps with information that just shouldn't be there. So it's a relevant thing to ask about. And quite often people see an ECLO and no one's ever asked them the question before. So it's a really important thing for me to get into the conversation. I think generally what I've just given you is a sort of whistle-stop tour, really, of what the ECLO does. But as I say, it goes in different directions sometimes, depending on an individual's needs. But generally, those are the most common things that everybody will be assessed on. But then depending on, as I say, what the individual's needs are, we'll go down different routes potentially. What I'll now do is open it up for any questions. Anyone have any questions on what I've just said, or maybe your own eye condition, or an upcoming appointment, or anything at all?
Yes, Glenn, that was very interesting. And I've wondered often, because I've seen ECLOs, I go up to Kendal, so they have an ECLO up there. And I've often wondered how it works, whether somebody comes out from a diagnosis not knowing which way to turn and happen to see you there, or whether once a diagnosis has been made, the consultant will say to the nurse, this person might like to speak to the ECLO, and they get taken to you. What is that in-between process between the consultant, the diagnosis, and you?
What tends to happen in a lot of different eye clinics is there will be lots of different sort of referral pathways in place. So it could be that the consultants identify and make a referral. It could be a member of staff, one of the staff nurses may identify, and either they will make a referral or make sure you get the ECLO's details so you can go away and make contact yourself. There's information dotted around in eye clinics, which obviously because of the pandemic at the moment, a lot of it has been moved, so it's not as visible obviously as it perhaps was before, but there'd be sort of business cards and things around for people to just take themselves. There is also areas where the doctors, when they make the notes, the secretaries can then identify that a person has some needs, and a referral will come from a secretary into the ECLO service. We sometimes, quite often, will get copied into letters for GPs. So obviously when you come to an eye clinic, and that creates a letter that goes to your GP to inform them of an update. So there's quite often some of those will get copied into the ECLO service. So we can see a particular update that's been sent to your GP and then identify, where we can discuss any needs. So generally what you try and do as an ECLO is have as many options as possible. So it's either, details are taken away, so it's for the patient themselves to get in touch, or there's various different ways along an individual's kind of eye care journey that will trigger a referral. So it can also happen from an optician as well. You could potentially go to an optician, they can do an eye health check, and they can also refer into the service as well. So we continue trying as hard as possible to just make sure that like every part of an eye care journey, there's room for it to be identified that there's a need, and then everybody knows what the pathway is to sort of refer into an ECLO service. So we do have many covered, but there's always different ways of doing it as well. So for example, I know that you're more so in kind of North Lancs, so sort of Morecambe, and obviously you say that you go to Westmoreland General. Around that area, they've had quite a lot of success now where you don't always have to go into the eye clinic for certain eye conditions. So for example, if you have glaucoma, you may be seen more so from a community optometrist within maybe a health centre or an optician's. So the traditional coming into an eye clinic for support isn't necessarily the route most of the time for an eye care journey. Sometimes it's done within the community, which is it's working well, it's successful, it's more efficient in some areas, people get seen quicker. So again, obviously we need to adapt to the ECLO service to make sure there's those parts of an eye care journey know how to refer in as well.
Sorry, Glenn, can I just ask quickly then, would that depend upon your health authority and the hospital you're under as to which pathways they use as individual establishments?
Yes, obviously it's probably for most ECLOs, a situation where you have more success in some areas of knowing quite confidently that I've got that covered. There's a lot of different referral pathways to get support for those particular needs, and then maybe others where we've not quite got the relationships as strong as we would like, and then obviously quite often that's where ECLOs will focus on. So obviously there's the patient support element that is the priority for an ECLO, but obviously there are those high priorities as well of making sure that we know onto as many parts of the eye care journey as possible. So for example, at the moment, we're doing a bit more work to look at the diabetic screening service to try and make sure that along that part of an individual's eye care journey, that they're aware of the ECLO service and how to refer into us, because that's an area that, that could be a bit stronger.
Interesting.
Never heard of this ECLO before, but I've been suffering for about 10 years, so it's a bit too late now.
Is it always too late, Glenn? Or would you say if you've got a concern, then you would recommend somebody have a chat with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Often I'm referred to an eye clinic liaison officer, but some people actually refer to it as it's kind of an eye care liaison officer. So, it's not necessarily about that, in the eye clinic support. So, maybe even if you're not coming into an eye clinic, there's still that assessment of need that is done with a bit more of a clinical view, just to look at, how things are for an individual. So, for example, a big thing that I regularly push is around, looking after our eye health. General public, we're often speaking about, getting your eyes tested. Going to an optician's isn't just about going because you need glasses. It's around going for an eye health check. So we're pushing that on a regular basis. Excuse me. But the idea is as well that, even if you do have an eye condition, it's very, very relevant that you still go to an optician's and have that eye care test done and make sure that there are no other underlying issues and, there's not been any further deterioration and things like that. So it's still very relevant for everybody, no matter kind of how long down the journey you are of having an eye condition. Something that I would often say is that, maybe if you have something like, glaucoma, we also know that eye conditions like age-related macular degeneration is age-related. So, the older we all get, we're all at risk. So even if you have glaucoma, it doesn't mean you're not at risk of other eye conditions. And obviously the best way to prevent any type of eye condition is continue to have that eye care test done within an optician's.
Thank you.
Yeah, because the role that I do as a sight loss advisor is quite different to the support that Glenn would offer. From an eye clinic, from a clinical side, of kind of how you're managing and things like that. So yeah, if you felt that it was necessary to have another chat, or as Glenn said, speak to an optician, then please make sure that you do that, because we offer, as sight loss advisors, like Pam and Pauline up at Morecambe, a very different kind of service.
Okay.
Who is the ECLO, or who provides the ECLO service at Manchester Eye Clinic? This is somebody who lives in Glossop, but is under Manchester Eye Clinic. The last I heard, it was Henshaw's, but that was a while. That's not, I don't know how up to date that is, who provides the ECLO service at Manchester Eye Clinic. Yeah,
and that's still the case. So I have two colleagues based in Manchester. One more so looks at children and genetics. And then the other ECLO focuses on generally any adult.
So she is
the relevant support, I would refer to one of my colleagues there and get the relevant support for obviously the ECLO service within Manchester. So any kind of query like that, again, you can refer that in. I'll have a conversation, agree that, they give me the consent to make that referral, and then we'll get support from that. I have a good relationship with the National Artificial Eye Service. And sometimes the support that's necessary it's more of an aesthetic change for an individual. So there may be more of a more emotional support to discuss those changes. I think one thing to say about the ECLO services is, even though I work for Galloway's, and Galloway's obviously, we cover Lancashire and Sefton. And as an ECLO, you're there to support patients that come into that particular eye clinic. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what organisation you work for. You're there to support, whatever patients come into that particular eye clinic. So Manchester, obviously, I work very closely with them. So it could be people from our area in Lancashire that get referred to Manchester, and we will liaise between ourselves to make sure we support that particular patient. So it could be someone from, from Preston who's been referred into Manchester to have some support.
Yeah, well, I've heard a lot of that. There's a lot of people go to Manchester Eye Clinic from all over the country because of its reputation.
Yeah.
Definitely, and I think it's dependent upon the eye condition as well, isn't it? As to the kind of the specialties that those particular clinics have. Like outside of Moorfields in London, St Paul's at the Royal Liverpool is one of the top-ranking corneal transplant areas, along with Manchester.
Yeah, because I think that's same where, obviously, when I mention, Galloway's is Lancashire and Sefton.
Yeah,
but quite often people that are perhaps just outside of Lancashire and Sefton, in terms of the eye clinics, someone may be within our area, but often people will go to Westmoreland General for their injections, Blackburn, Blackpool, Wigan, for the macular injections. It's like you say, we have close relationships with those ECLOs to just make sure, either we offer the support or that particular ECLO does, so nobody slips through that net.
When I started going to Westmoreland General, it was on a Saturday morning, and the ECLO people weren't there.
Okay.
So I didn't know anything about ECLO, and then there was an article done in the local paper about the ECLOs in North Lancashire. So I changed my appointments on the days that the ECLOs were at Westmoreland General. Then I could see them, and they proved absolutely superb.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah. But I didn't know anything about it, and of course there's nobody there to advise you anyway.
Yeah, it's a difficult thing, really, because obviously, if we don't have an eye condition, then more often than not, we don't know anything about those types of services.
No.
And obviously, if an eye condition, comes quite suddenly, and you do now have some issues, quite often, like you say, it's then how do you find that information? So when I mentioned a moment ago of trying to make sure that various different parts of an eye care journey should know of an ECLO and how to refer into us, and we keep doing as much as we can to kind of make that stronger. So like you say, whether it's from an optician or whether it's all the way through to, if somebody gets referred to Manchester and beyond, we as much as possible, make sure we got those strong relationships.
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe from Joan's point of view, then, if there was the facility for those doing the injections and things to maybe have a contact card for the ECLO service, and something that at that time may have been beneficial without Joan rearranging the day of her appointment. So they self-referred you.
Yeah. So like you say, sometimes things like that is quite good feedback, and it kind of helps the ECLO to make things a little bit stronger as well. So an ECLO can physically say to the eye clinic, look, a patient came in, didn't know anything about support, so that it identifies that, a little bit more is needed to try and make sure people know what support's available. And because sometimes then what may happen is, we'll sometimes do presentations within clinical meetings in front of consultants, doctors, staff nurses, just to keep that reminder of the support is here if people need it, and how to get in touch with the ECLO if support is needed. It takes a refresher every now and then, because obviously,
there's some
staff changes and things.
Busy in an eye clinic, isn't it?
Yeah, very much so. Eye clinics are in most hospitals, eye clinics are the busiest outpatient wards. So that there's a constant stream of people. So like you say, it's just getting the message out there is obviously challenging at times, but we do get the support out to people. Occasionally people do slip through the net, and like you say, it's good to then know how somebody has perhaps slipped through the net, so we can make sure we get that bit covered so it doesn't happen again.
Definitely, because the role is also not just for that initial news that you've got your eye condition. If at a point where you get told you've got this condition and we're all good for now, we're going to monitor you, but 6 months down the line, 2 years down the line, 12 years down the line, it might be a case of, right, well, your sight's deteriorated so much, you need to be registered as severely sight impaired, you know, and your alarm bells go off in your head. And now what do we do? Where do I turn? And Glen and colleagues is the first place within the hospital to turn to. And then, you know, using their expertise to give that initial support, and then hopefully refer on to your local social services, your local sight loss charity, whoever else need be.
Yeah.
You know, so it's not just that initial one-off contact, is it, Glen? It's like an almost ongoing ad hoc service.
Yeah, because sometimes I'll explain to a patient that, you know, the role of my role as an ECLO, I'm employed by Galloway's, but I'm not always as a representation of Galloway's. If the support for an individual is more so from social services, then, you know, that's the priority. We focus on that. You know, I'm not just considering that, you know, Galloway's are the person that supports this individual. So I'm there to represent, you know, all different types of support. So it's, if I have the answer, or if I don't, the plan is, you know, I'll find the answer, you know, from somebody. So, you know, it's a very much, you know, solution-based role at times. You know, you come to me with an issue, I'll either have the answer or I'll know somebody who does. And like you say, we can then agree on what happens next for that individual.
When you go to an appointment, can you request someone like an echo? Sometimes when you go to speak to a doctor, sometimes they give you a lot of jargon. It's hard to understand them sometimes.
Great question. Yes. What we tend to do at times is if we speak to you before you come in clinic and we're then aware of when you're coming in, we can agree on acting as an advocate for you. So we can then attend an appointment with you. And like you say, we can then be the person that makes all the notes, and then we can have a conversation about it afterwards. And like you say, sometimes then it's about, you know, explaining some of that, obviously, as you say, that jargon. You know, obviously an ECLO starts to learn that language, you know, and be able to speak that language, you know, so we can make the notes and then explain it, and obviously making sure that you go away understanding, you know, what's just been said. What we can also do, if we don't always manage to be there in person and act as an advocate, what we can always do is request the notes. So if you know you attended on a certain date and saw a doctor and you don't quite remember what was said, if I can gather that information from you and then liaise with the eye clinic to find out, you know, and get the details of the notes from that particular appointment, I can then come back to you and say, well, I've got a copy of the record here, you know, the patient record, and we can have a conversation about, you know, what was said.
My second question is, if someone has sight loss and living with dementia, can they be signposted to someone else?
In terms of support with the two, do you mean?
Yeah, with the two conditions.
Yeah, so generally that's something that I would have a conversation to an individual about. We do have some quite good information within some resources around support for somebody who has sight loss and dementia. And then we'll look at, because it's not necessarily one organisation that supports with the two. It's about marrying up some support perhaps from maybe Galloway's in terms of the sight loss advice, and then maybe something like, you know, Alzheimer's Association then for the support with, you know, the dementia side of things, and try and, you know, link those together. That's then where I say it's quite important that then what we do is we agree a follow-up to see then what support was given from both those two organisations, and just help make sure that all, you know, links together and is appropriate.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think just one little, because you were saying about the eye, working with a patient in an eye clinic appointment like that, Glen, a minute ago. I think that's particularly good for anybody who's deaf. I mean, somebody like me that's hearing impaired as well, when English is not very often, the doctors we have in this country is not very often their first language, and trying to explain, you know, what you've got to do or what's wrong with your eyes, you know. I think it's good that you do that.
There's a number of things, you know. It's quite common that it could just be somebody who's just feeling really anxious about it and is quite overwhelmed with the whole experience. So it's not easy to come away and remember exactly. And like you say, particularly if there's some really key information that you want to get out of it, if you're feeling really overwhelmed with it all, it's not easy to remember it. And obviously, if you perhaps don't have the means to make notes yourself, because obviously, if you do have the means, it's always a good thing to do to maybe take pen and paper and note things down yourself. But if you don't have the means to do that, then again, it's useful if somebody can help you do that. Maybe, an individual maybe has a learning disability or autism, and needs some support to attend an appointment. And like you say, lots of different scenarios that, we will attend them and offer some support. Because like you say, we can then make the notes. Sometimes we then may understand more in terms of what question maybe need to be asked, just to make sure that we've got as much information as we need. So for example, if an individual has glaucoma, either I will ask or I'll always remind the patient to ask, of just asking what the individual's eye pressures are. Obviously, glaucoma is an eye condition that affects the pressure of the eye. So for that individual, for that patient to have as much information as possible to manage their own, it's always good to obviously know what it is, know what your eye pressure is. Then next time you go, you then know yourself whether it's
person.
You then know yourself with a further follow-up, has it gone up or down? Because sometimes you may only be told that your pressures are high, but obviously if you don't know it as a number, it's hard to then measure when you're tested again.
And it's knowing on that scale what the pressure
yourself yet. Has anybody come up with something that a person with glaucoma, because I know a lot of people take the drops every day, but what an individual cannot do unless they go to the eye clinic is take a daily pressure reading.
There are things out there that do that, but it's not something that you can sort of, purchase and then it's yours for long-term, maintaining your pressures. I've seen something that was very early stages. It was something around using a smartphone for it, but it's very early development. But there is something now where if a consultant felt the need to recognise what your pressures look like throughout the day, to know whether you have certain peaks or whether you have certain dips, what they can do is some eye clinics can give a device that you take away and test for 1 or 2 days. And then basically you bring that device back into clinic and then they can download the information from it and see what your pressures are like all throughout the day at certain times.
Oh, so we're a step nearer getting something that people can have at home all the time, like they have a blood pressure monitor,
So from a clinical perspective, there's constant, evolution of certain ways of doing things, and new technology within eye clinics that's coming up, and new treatments pop up every now and then. And more recently, there's now there's a new particular injection if you have wet AMD, which means you can have an injection and then you have a longer gap. I think at the moment I've forgotten the name of it. But there's a particular injection where you have it and then you perhaps don't need to go back again for around about 10, 12 weeks. Whereas for most people at the moment who go for injections, it's kind of roughly you go every 6 weeks.
For MD, Macular Degeneration. I spoke to somebody and she was told, I don't need to go as often now because of different drops. And have they come up with a way to make it easier to put drops in? Because that's another outstanding thing. There are gadgets out there, I know, to help you put drops in, but they're not foolproof, and nobody's come up with a solution for that. Because I know some things can be prescribed as tablets as an alternative method of taking it, but that's about it.
Drops,
plastic gadgets that don't
drops is a technique. And when I mentioned as like one of the very first conversations that we'll have with a patient around what eye condition they have, and then if there's any treatment, if the treatment for an individual is eye drops, we'll have that conversation very early on of how is the individual managing with taking those drops. From there, then we'll identify, does this person need a dispensing aid to help them take the drops? And then see if that type of things work. There's lots of different shapes and sizes of dispensing aid, depending on a particular individual's difficulty with taking them. So yeah, it's a very individual conversation to then have around, you know, whether somebody is managing with something like eye drops. So again, you know, any support with that, you know, you can speak to an ECLO and we'll have a conversation and support someone with that.
Because sometimes it makes me wonder if doctors really realise the difficulty that people have putting drops in, as you've probably seen and know people have had difficulty putting drops in. Do the doctors really know how difficult it is for a number of people to put drops in and get it in the right place?
Yeah, it is difficult. And obviously that's then where I can have a conversation around the technique.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Glenn. It's been a
No
really
problem, Jenny.
good, interesting session this afternoon. And
Yeah.
some
Thank you everybody
amazing-
for some great questions.
Yeah, I was going to say great questions. So you're back with us next month. What is your topic then? Or is it find out on the day?
Yeah, at the moment, there's a lot of different things where I'm trying to learn more myself. And as I mentioned a moment ago, try and just make some referral pathways a bit stronger. And, you know, so we may start to make it a little bit more eye condition specific. So for example, when I mentioned a moment ago, I'm going to do a bit more work in the next few weeks around the diabetic screening service. Like I say, maybe a future one could be the eye drop technique. You know, we could do a variety of different ones.
Yeah.
Or maybe we ask people themselves, you know, is there something that we want to focus on, you know, like eye health and nutrition and you know, different topics.
I think that would be a really good one, especially with relation to diabetes and also macular degeneration, because they're the two main sight loss conditions within the kind of the age range that we deal with, particularly here at Galloway. So I think the majority of our service users have got one or the other or both of those eye conditions. So I think that would be a really good topic, maybe for July, give you a little time to
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I don't know the topic now, but I shall make sure we all know.
We like to test our speakers, don't we, guys? Brilliant. Okie dokie. Well, thank you all very much for coming this afternoon. We're going to let Glenn go because we are extremely privileged to have an hour of his time. Because as you can appreciate, being an ECLO, he's extraordinarily busy. So thank you so much, and we will see you all soon.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.